Just like war business, the best business they know. Multinational profits going through the sky, they multiply while children die. The same amount buys food and clothes for everyone, all over the world, all over the world.
New York, New York.
Thank you. There's one thing, there's one common thread that runs through everybody here. One common thread, and that's we're opposed to wars and war making. All aspects of war, all war making. We're opposed to that. And everyone here wants peace and justice in this world, and we want it now. Veterans for Peace stands in solidarity with all people that are oppressed by war. People in Yemen, people in Syria, the people of Afghanistan, and the people in Ukraine. We want war to end. So there's a common thread that we have to look for. Right here in this country, the U.S. has 800 military bases all around the world. They make the most munitions in the world. They sell and supply munitions to everyone. Anywhere you see war, they are using American munitions, American weapons. That's got to tell you something. That's really got to say something. And there are people in this country, the military-industrial complex. And before, when I said that we all want peace and justice in this world, that is unless we work for the CIA or unless we are part of the military-industrial complex, which I hope nobody here is. So we're opposed to war, and we know who profits from war. We know how much money goes into facilitating wars, and we know how much the U.S. Pentagon gets every year. What the U.S. Pentagon gets could end hunger, could end water poverty in this world. A portion of that money. So we don't need to facilitate war. We don't need to give weapons to anyone. People don't need weapons. Weapons are not the way to end war. The way to end war is nonviolent resistance. Nonviolent resistance. So I want to say, we stand with all people, once again, that are oppressed by war in all countries. And the U.S. happens to be waging war in quite a few countries right now as we speak. It's not only Russia. We have to take blame ourselves. We have to take a lot of blames. So think about the common thread that unites us and stay in solidarity. Hello, Anthony. Thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be Julie Finch. She's a Quaker, an activist, a preservationist, and a writer. And who better to talk about peace than a Quaker?
Hi, everybody. The Quakers have been against war since 1660. And I have this message from the Quakers in Ukraine. I copied it off the internet. Anti-war. I am really shocked at all of the pictures and all of the TV pictures about people being killed and being shot at in Ukraine. And it's so noisy here. And we want to negotiate. We want to not have any no-fly zone, because that is really tempting to Russia. I don't know what else to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I got it. And our next guest is well known within the Irish American community, Brendan Faye. He wears many hats here in New York City, originally from County Louth, or Drogheda, as some people call it, Drogheda.
Thank you.
But today he's with the New York campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. And in the irony of it, he's here 2 days after the bombing of a nuclear reactor in Ukraine. And also, he's a gay activist and a founder of the St. Pat's for All Parade in Sunnyside, Queens, which is tomorrow in Sunnyside, Queens, 43rd Street and Skillman Avenue. We'll be marching there with the Ukrainian delegation. Will be in the parade. So I go to now Brendan Faye.
Hello, New York! I look around at all of you gathered here today to say no to war. I look at all of you today and I see that your hearts have brought you out into the streets of Times Square. I look around at all of you and I too am moved. While most people have turned their hearts, their heads away from the images of war and bombing, what you have done and always done is look towards the suffering and pain. And you are moved to take a stand for peace and to say no to war. I look at each of you. Let us together send a message to brothers and sisters like you and I, gathering in villages and towns and city squares to say no to war and yes to peace. Today we send a message of solidarity to conscientious objectors, to Russian soldiers who are saying, I will not kill, I will not shoot, I will not go to war. Today we send a message to the thousands of people in Russia who are on the streets saying yes to peace and no to war, not in our name. I thank each and every one of you for listening to your heart and choosing tenderness over terror. You have chosen humanity. You have chosen life over death. You are taking a stand for the human capacity to love instead of hate. This sends a message across the world. Were you like me when you saw the images of the children in the hospital? Were you too moved to tears? I was. Because never lose your humanity.
Right.
That is what is at stake.
Right.
Death, war takes away our humanity. We are here to stand together. Solidarity, saying no to war, and I am proud in New York City. We say no to war, yes to divestment. No to war, yes to disarmament. No to war, no to war. No to war, yes to disarmament. Keep standing for peace. Hold your heart. Thank you for standing for peace, for love, for humanity. Okay, thank you.
And our next speaker from Staten Island, the irony is that Brendan Faye can march in Queens tomorrow in St. Pat's Parade and on 5th Avenue, but at the St. Pat's Parade in Staten Island, he cannot march. But we have Sally Jones from Staten Island. She's a Peace Action Fund for New York State and a founding member of the Peace Action of Staten Island. Well, sure, Sally.
As they said, my name is Sally Jones. I'm from Peace Action, New York State, Peace Action of Staten Island. I'm a mother, wife, grandmother, aunt, great aunt, sister. I'm a Unitarian Universalist. Peace Action slogan is peace demands action. The Unitarian Universalist's sixth principle is to work for a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Like you, I am anti-war. Most people on this planet are anti-war. If all of us, the 999 of 1,000, the 99.9%, the workers, the poets, the musicians, the lovers, everyone, if we stand up and say no to war and every war, we can end the violence in Ukraine. All over the world, people are talking about Ukraine in the media and in their families. I hear it in my own family. They say, we cannot let Putin get away with this. We have to do whatever it takes to stop him. Are you hearing that too? Well, are we on a march to an expanded war? Pouring in more weapons, more death, more destruction. Forgetting what brought us to this brink. Our own country's hubris, our own country's militarism, our own march to Russia's borders with bases and NATO expansion. The 99.9% of people who want peace and justice need to get to work and put the brakes on war. We need to close arms with our peace-loving Russian brothers and sisters who are risking their lives right now in anti-war protest. We need to call for diplomacy, for restraint, for humanitarian assistance for victims of all wars at every level of government, in all institutions. We need to call for a ceasefire, for negotiations. Ultimately, we need to roll back the patriarchy of militarism. We need to call out the weapons manufacturers. We need to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We need to cut the Pentagon budget. We need to create common security frameworks. We need to continue showing up in the streets together, united for peace and justice. Thank you.
And our next speaker is Mark Elliott Stein. It's with an organization, World Beyond War, a native New Yorker, the technology director of World Beyond War, something that this planet probably has never seen.
People of New York City, how sick are we of war?
Sick.
Are you sick of it? Do you remember the Iraq War? Do you remember the Afghanistan War? Do you realize the Korean War has not even ended yet?
The war by the Israelis.
We don't need another war. The war in Israel. Yemen. We don't need another war today. We need to stop this war. We need to de-escalate this war. All sides of this war had every chance to avoid it from happening. It's still not too late. The worst has not yet happened. Let's come together, everybody here. Get in touch with your humanity. Put aside your anger. Put aside your hatred. Get in touch with your love for each other, the love for your family, the love for your community. We need to come together and urge negotiation, peace deals, de-escalation. Take it down. Take it the fuck down. This planet cannot stand one more war. We have no capacity for one more war. This country will not survive one more war. And I have a hard time not believing this country is at war with itself. Thank you. I am Mark Elliott Stein from World Beyond War. CODEPINK is here. Raging Grannies are here. Awesome. Veterans for Peace. Zul. Our friends in Ireland. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Thank you for everybody here, for being here because you love our planet. You love the people who live here. For peace.
Our next speaker is Margaret Kimberly. She's with the Black Alliance for Peace and the executive editor of the Black Agenda Report, which I'm sure you can hear at some stage on WBAI. And we welcome Margaret Kimberly.
Thank you. Power to the people. Power to the people. I'm here with comrades from Black Alliance for Peace. The Black Alliance for Peace is mindful of the loss of life in Ukraine, but also in Somalia, Yemen, and every nation suffering under NATO wars of domination.
That's right.
We offer our unwavering solidarity with the people of those places. Our concern for the people of Ukraine must be added to our overarching concern for those in Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Honduras, Brazil, Nicaragua, Cuba, and other nations. We note that as the U.S. condemned the military actions of the Russian Federation, its armed drones bombed Somalia, and that black immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean were abandoned and mistreated in the Ukraine.
That's right. That's right.
Black Alliance for Peace calls, obviously, for peace, which is not just the absence of war. It means having a world where there is no domination by one nation.
That's right. Yeah. How about
no
that?
U.S. hegemony.
That's right.
No more NATO.
Right. Yeah.
Peace means that we have leaders who care about the people, who do the people's business, not the business of the military-industrial complex.
That's right. That's
whose stocks have all gone through the roof in the last week and a half. So we must ask, obviously, for peace, but it has to be a peace that works for the people. We are in solidarity with oppressed people all over the world. And they cannot live in peace as long as we have U.S. hegemony, as long as the U.S., EU, and NATO axis of domination feels free to destroy lives in Afghanistan or Libya or anywhere else. That is what we all must speak out for.
Yeah.
So let us, if everyone is asking, what do we do? What can I do? It's very simple. Tell our leaders to talk, to have good faith negotiations.
Yeah.
Not negotiations that mean the U.S. gets what it wants. That is why we are at this point today. So, power to the people.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Let's all work for peace. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret Kimberly.
I got it. Take my job
Well,
away.
our next speaker, you can hear him on WBAI every Sunday after the show that I host with Malachi McCourt on WBAI. He's a former war correspondent for the New York Times and author, and he also has a television show on Contact, which I keep checking for before the censorship starts coming in on Chris Hedges here. They're talking about censorship in Russia. Let's start talking about the censorship that's coming to this country, and no one can speak better on that than Chris Hedges, and I'd like to thank him for having me on as a yellow cab driver on his show a couple of years ago. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks. Actually, the show is off the air. RT has been shut down. We all knew it was coming. It wasn't because of Russian propaganda. Preemptive war, whether in Iraq or Ukraine, is a war crime. It does not matter if the war is launched on the basis of lies and fabrications, as was the case in Iraq, or because of the breaking of a series of agreements with Russia, including the promise by Washington not to expand NATO beyond the borders of a unified Germany, not to deploy thousands of NATO troops in Eastern Europe, not to meddle in the internal affairs of nations on Russia's border, and the refusal to implement the Minsk II peace agreement. The invasion of Ukraine, I expect, and I was in Eastern Europe as a reporter in 1989, would never have happened if these promises had been kept. Russia has every right to feel threatened, betrayed, and angry. But to understand is not to condone. The invasion of Ukraine under post-Nuremberg laws is a criminal war of aggression. I know the instrument of war. War is not politics by other means. It is demonic. I spent 2 decades as a war correspondent in Central America, the Middle East, Africa, and the Balkans, where I covered the wars in Bosnia and Kosovo. I carry within me the ghosts of dozens of those swallowed up in the violence, including my close friend, Reuters correspondent Kurt Schork, who was killed in an ambush in Sierra Leone, along with another friend, Miguel Gil Moreno. I know the chaos and disorientation of war, the constant uncertainty and confusion. In a firefight, you are only aware of what is happening a few feet around you. You desperately, and not always successfully, struggle to figure out where the firing is coming from in the hopes you can avoid being hit. I have felt the helplessness and the paralyzing fear, which years later descend on me like a freight train in the middle of the night, leaving me wrapped in coils of terror, my heart racing, my body dripping with sweat. I have heard the wails of those convulsed by grief as they clutch the bodies of friends and family, including children. I hear them still. It does not matter the language, Spanish, Arabic, Hebrew, Dinka, Serbo-Croatian, Albanian, Ukrainian, Russian. Death cuts through the linguistic barriers. I know what wounds look like. Legs blown off, heads imploded into a bloody, pulpy mass, gaping holes in stomachs, pools of blood, cries of the dying, sometimes for their mothers. And the smell of death, the supreme sacrifice made for flies and maggots. I was beaten by Iraqi and Saudi secret police. I was taken prisoner by the Contras in Nicaragua, who radioed back to their base in Honduras to see if they should kill me, and again in Basra after the first Gulf War, never knowing if I would be executed under constant guard and often without food, drinking out of mud puddles. The primary lesson in war is that we, as distinct individuals, do not matter. We become numbers, fodder, objects. Life, once precious and sacred, becomes meaningless, sacrificed to the insatiable appetite of Mars, and no one in wartime is exempt. We were expendable, Eugene Sledge wrote of his experiences as a Marine in the South Pacific in World War II. It was difficult to accept. We come from a nation and a culture that values life and the individual. To find oneself in a situation where your life seems of little value is the ultimate in loneliness. It is a humbling experience. The landscape of war is hallucinogenic. It defies comprehension. You have no concept of time in a firefight. A few minutes, a few hours. War in an instant obliterates homes and communities, all that was once familiar, and leaves behind smoldering ruins and a trauma that you carry for the rest of your life. I have tasted enough of war, enough of my own fear, my body turned to jelly, to know that war is always evil, the purest expression of death, dressed up in patriotic cant about liberty and democracy and sold to the naive as a ticket to glory, honor, and courage. It is a toxic and seductive elixir. Those who survive, as Kurt Vonnegut wrote, struggle afterwards to reinvent themselves and their universe, which on some level will never make sense again. War destroys all systems that sustain and nurture life, familial, economic, cultural, political, environmental, and social. Once war begins, no one, not even those nominally in charge of waging war, can guess what will happen, how the war will develop, how it can drive armies and nations towards suicidal folly. There are no good wars, none. And this includes World War II, which has been sanitized and mythologized to mendaciously celebrate American heroism, purity, and goodness. If truth is the first casualty in war, ambiguity is the second. The bellicose rhetoric embraced and amplified by the American press, demonizing Vladimir Putin and elevating the Ukrainians to the status of demigods, demanding more robust military intervention, along with the crippling sanctions meant to bring down Putin's government, is infantile and dangerous. and the Russian media is as simplistic as our own. There were no discussions about pacifism in the basements of Sarajevo when we were being hit with hundreds of Serbian shells a day and under constant sniper fire. It made sense to defend the city. It made sense to kill or be killed. The Bosnian Serb soldiers in the Drina Valley, Vukovar, and Srebrenica had amply demonstrated their capacity for murderous rampages, including the gunning down of hundreds of soldiers and civilians and the wholesale rape of women and girls. But this did not save any of the defenders in Sarajevo from the poison of violence, the soul-destroying force that is war. I knew a Bosnian soldier who heard a sound behind a door while patrolling on the outskirts of Sarajevo. He fired a burst from his AK-47 through the door. A delay of a few seconds in combat can mean death. When he opened the door, he found the bloody remains of a 12-year-old girl. His daughter was 12. He never recovered. Only the autocrats and politicians who dream of empire and global hegemony, of the godlike power that comes with wielding armies, warplanes, and fleets, along with the merchants of death, whose business floods countries with weapons, profit from war. The expansion of NATO into Eastern Europe has earned Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Analytic Services, Huntington Ingalls, Humana, BAE Systems, and L3 Harris billions in profits. And the stoking of the conflict in Ukraine will earn them billions more. The European Union has allocated hundreds of millions of euros to purchase weapons for Ukraine. Germany will almost triple its own defense budget for 2022. The Biden administration has asked Congress to provide $6.4 billion in funding to assist Ukraine, supplementing the $650 million in military aid to Ukraine over the past year. The permanent war economy operates outside the laws of supply and demand. It is the root of the 2-decade-long quagmire in the Middle East, and it is the root of the conflict with Moscow. The merchants of death are satanic. The more corpses they produce, the more their bank accounts swell. They will cash in on this conflict, one that now flirts with a nuclear holocaust that would terminate life on Earth as we know it. The dangerous and sadly predictable provocation of Russia, whose nuclear arsenal places the sword of Damocles above our heads by expanding NATO, was understood by all of us who were reporting in Eastern Europe in 1989 during the revolutions and the breakup of the Soviet Union. This provocation, which includes establishing a NATO missile base 100 miles from Russia's border, was foolish and highly irresponsible. It never made geopolitical sense. This does not, however, excuse the invasion of Ukraine. Yes, the Russians were baited, but they reacted by pulling the trigger, and this is a crime, their crime. Let us pray for a ceasefire. Let us work for a return to diplomacy and sanity, a moratorium on arms shipments to Ukraine, and the withdrawal of Russian troops from the country. Let us hope for an end to war before we stumble into a nuclear holocaust that devours us all.
Now, our next guests, two of them, are following in the footsteps of the Berrigan brothers and Charlie Sheehan, the Kings Bay Plowshares. Carmen Trotta and Mark Colville will be now addressing the crowd.
No more war! No more war! No more war! No more war!
No more war! No more war! No more war!
This war in particular could provoke a nuclear catastrophe. This is my co-defendant, Mark Colville, from the Kings Bay Plowshare 7. So we've spent just a little bit of time in prison, in federal prison, for going to where America keeps a quarter of its nuclear arsenal to decry all war and nuclear war in particular.
Mark has written a statement. The Kings Bay Plowshares have put together a statement to make, and Mark is going to read it for us.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you, Chris Hedges, for your brilliance, for your courage, and for your truth-telling. Thank you. Today, the Kings Bay Plowshares 7 join our prayers with the global community for the people of Ukraine at this deeply terrifying historical moment. We watch with moral outrage and horror as another nuclear weapons wielding state is emboldened to abandon diplomacy in favor of international gangsterism, killing indiscriminately with impunity, environmental destruction without boundary or responsibility, the plunging of millions into refugee status, the flouting of the very fundamentals of law, human rights, international cooperation, and the authority of the United Nations. These are the common threads that tie together Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine during this most blood-stained of centuries. They are also constitutive elements of the unmitigated evil that is constantly unleashed through the design, development, and existence of nuclear weapons in any nation or by any people. As U.S. Catholics, therefore, we believe that the starting point of our response should be to highlight the lesson of last Sunday's gospel reading from Luke, which reads in part, quote, "How can you say to your brother or sister, let me remove that splinter in your eye, when you do not even notice the wooden beam in your own eye? You hypocrite! Remove the wooden beam from your eye first. Then you will see clearly to remove the splinter in your brother's eye." As we unequivocally condemn the deranged behavior of Russia's dictator, Vladimir Putin, and his minions, we are obliged also to acknowledge our own government's role in creating this crisis. For more than 30 years now, U.S. foreign policy in that region of the world has been pursued with a provocative agenda of destabilization, imperiling Russia's national security through the expansion of NATO right up to its borders. This project has been intensified in recent times by apostate evangelical Christian factions in Washington, which have openly admitted their desire to provoke world events that they believe will bring about the second coming of Christ. And over all of this madness and slaughter preside its silent partners, the only winners in any war today. U.S.-based weapons contractor corporations like Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Electric, and United Technologies, to name just a few, whose profits increase with every cluster bomb and missile launched, every body torn to pieces. For our complicity with all of these forces that are literally driving the world insane, we beg the forgiveness of God and neighbor, while affirming our solidarity with both the Russian and Ukrainian peoples. We pledge non-cooperation with any armed faction in this senseless conflict. To all soldiers we say, lay down your weapons. Your courage and sacrifice belong at the service of peace for the future of the human race, not to be spent in bloodshed on the altar of the national security state. Together we can let the words of Martin Luther King Jr. echo through these times until they shake the world back into reality. The choice today is between nonviolence and non-existence. Blessings.
Thank you. And now we're going to have a little bit of music here from this is the Peace Movement's house band. You might hear about house bands on a lot of late night talk shows. but these are the real house bands. It's the New York City Metro Raging Grannies. The first chapter of the Raging Grannies appeared in Victoria, Canada in 1987 to oppose nuclear weapons. The Raging Grannies are now an international anti-war organization, and the New York City gaggle needs no introduction.
As the grannies gather, let's all of you who are speaking, please come close to the mic, to the bench. I want to acknowledge one of the great peace and justice organizers of our time, Leslie Kagan. Thank you for coming out today. Leslie Kagan, thank you.
Second song is by Alice Sutter. Oh, there we go. Okay. No business like
There's no business like war. Business the worst business we know. Never mind the homeless and the hungry. Never mind the people without jobs. Nowhere can you get that special feeling. And when you're piling up the bombs. There's no business like war. Business the best business they know. Multinational profits going through the sky. They multiply while children die. The same amount buys food and clothes for everyone. All over the world. All over the world.
Why are we silent while so many die? Why are we silent while so many die? Why are we silent while so many die? No bombing, no droning, no more. No bombing, no droning, no more. When we bomb and drone, children die. Corporations make money, families cry. Homes are gone, the waters go dry. No bombing, no droning, no more. No bombing, no droning, no more.
Asian Granny. Flounders.
Well, I had the mic. There are solidarity wishes from the New York the Union Square Women in Black, who stand in Union Square for the Palestinian people every Thursday at 5 p.m. And there's a statement that I'll pass around from the Women in Black. This Women in Black oppose war, militarism, and violence. We stand with women and girls around the world, working together to build real security, justice, and peace. And there's a lot more to that, but I'll save it, pass it around.
Yeah. All right, next guest is Sarah Flounders. She's a co-director of the International Action Center, coordinator for the United National Anti-War Coalition, and she's also an author and an editor. Thank you, Sarah.
For everyone who's out here today to say no war, that's important, that's courageous, that's gutsy. And the situation we're in today, it's a perfect analogy. We're surrounded by a corporate media that's for war, that only talks about war, that only justifies the war. And we're standing up to it. And it's not easy. It's not easy, but we're here. We're here, right? We're here. And we gotta know We gotta know when we say no NATO war, what that means. It's not easy. No NATO war.
No NATO war! No NATO war! No NATO war!
And we gotta fight racism, not Russia. 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 This is a war. It's dangerous. We all know that. But we gotta know it could end today. Today. If the U.S. and NATO would stop pumping in the arms, stop pumping in the missiles, stop firing. That is what has created this war. The expansion of NATO. I was in Yugoslavia during the war, 78 days. They tell you this is the biggest war since World War II. How about Iraq?
Yes.
How about Libya?
Yes.
How about Yemen today?
Yes.
How about Somalia, where the U.S. is firing missiles today?
Right.
Are we going to forget Afghanistan?
Yes.
These are the wars that lay ruin whole parts of the world. So to everyone who's come out, it's going to be hard in the period ahead. But you know, the mood is going to change because this war will bring poverty and hunger in Ukraine, in Russia, and right here too. Right here too. We know it. It divides people, Ukrainian and Russian, and it divides right here. So let's take courage. Let's stand up. Let's continue to say no war, no war, no NATO, no NATO, no NATO,
No war!
and let's say also no NATO, no NATO, no NATO, no NATO, no NATO.
No NATO!
Last chant, and let's remember it in the days ahead. Fight racism, not Russia. Fight racism, not Russia. Fight racism, not Russia. Thank you. And thank you for the guts to be out here today. We're going to keep doing it, right?
All right, thank you, Sarah. And our next speaker is Suzanne Ross with the International Concerned Family and Friends of Mumia Abu-Jamal, anti-imperialist organizer with the spirit of Mandela and an advocate for political prisoners worldwide.
Yeah, Suzanne Ross.
She wears many hats.
Greetings, sisters and brothers. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good.
And we got our song.
It's good to be here among you. Last week I came by accident. I got confused about the date. And there was no one like you all out here. I was surrounded by people with just pictures of Putin looking like Hitler and, you know, war to Russia and, you know, hate, 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 hate. And it is really good to be with you, with the grannies, with love, and a love for justice. A love not only for peace, but we learned over the years that we can't just talk about peace. We have to talk about justice. I want to be sure before I talk about the current situation that I bring Mumia Abu-Jamal here.
Yeah.
Everybody know Mumia Abu-Jamal? Well, Mumia has talked about dozens of countries and dozens of wars. Mumia has been a speaker for anti-imperialism over and over and over again. And he continues his struggle from prison as the DA of Philadelphia, the liberal DA of Philadelphia, continues to postpone a hearing on new evidence that could acquit him, that could get him free. So we have to pay attention while we're doing this to all our comrades who are still in prison for years and years and years, elders who are sick. And I just want to chant one thing for all the prisoners before I go on to Ukraine. What's the call?
Free them all!
What's the call?
Free them all!
What's the call?
Free them all!
Okay. So the other night on Ralph and Betty's show, I heard Professor Louis start with a poem that went like this: lies, 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 everywhere lies, lies, lies. And I feel that for the past few weeks, we've been surrounded by an avalanche of constant lies in a period of time when Americans are being told over and over again not to study history, where critical resistance theory, what is it called?
Critical race theory
is being denied, is being fought, where books are being banned. This is an atmosphere of ignorance.
Yes.
An atmosphere that's pushing ignorance. I'm a longtime educator, as I know many people are right here. We can't let this go on. Let our children and even the adults remain ignorant nonstop and hear all these lies. So every day we've heard for the last 2 weeks, we've heard that the whole world is denouncing Russia. The whole world is against Russia and Putin. How many Americans have heard about the fact that Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, other countries, and 24 African nations did not support the United States position at the United Nations? These are the lies. People want peace, people want justice. They're not buying what the United States is trying to push internationally. And we have to encourage that. We have to encourage knowledge, education, not ignorance. We have to develop a consciousness that's anti-racist, that's anti-imperialist, that stands for justice. We have to develop that kind of consciousness in this country.
You're here.
So,
I have nothing else to do.
that's my most important message, is really that there isn't one voice. There are different polarities. The United States is not dominating the whole world as it wants us to believe. There are definitely struggles and countries around the world that are challenging U.S. domination, U.S. ignorance, U.S. murder, non-stop murder. People talked about the 800 military bases. Who's responsible for most of the killing in this world? Who is it?
We are.
Who is it? It's not the Soviet, it's not Russia. It's the United States. Russia doesn't have 800 bases around the world. Russia doesn't have the kind of wealth that the United States does and military apparatus. So, just not to go on and on.
Don't stop. Wrap it up.
I want to repeat the slogan so people can hear them. No to U.S. imperialism.
No to U.S. imperialism.
No to NATO.
No to NATO.
No to regime change over and over again all over the world by the United States. No to regime change.
No to regime change.
No to war on Russia.
No to war. Russia.
Yes to justice and peace.
Yes to justice and peace.
Our next guest, or speaker, I had the pleasure of having a pint of Guinness with him.
Please help out. Larry, help back out the back. Take your time. Slowly, slowly, slowly.
I was hanging out with Ralph Pointer, was at Rocky Sullivan's at the Iraq Veterans Against the War. And Ralph Pointer is the Lynn Stewart organizer, son of a Pittsburgh Steel Union organizer, and founder of the United Federation of Teachers. He's a leading activist for the community control of education in New York City neighborhood. He's also the widower of the late people's lawyer, Lynn Stewart.
Thank you so much for that.
Ralphie.
Good evening, my sisters and brothers. brothers and sisters. But here we go again. Once again, the world travels in circles. And this time, it's worse than the last time. Once again, the world travels in circles and cycles of war. If I can only stand up. On one of the last times, it was Iraq. But there was resistance the last time. In spite of weapons of mass destruction, in spite of Yellow Cake, in spite of Tony Blair, in spite of W, there was resistance.
Yes.
Well, we're going to create some resistance here and now. For I say to you and all, where is the rush for the effort to give people who look like me voting rights? How long will we wait?
Not long.
Where is the rush and the effort to give New Yorkers housing?
Yes.
Where is the effort and the rush for a national health care system?
Yes, testify.
Where is the rush to give humanitarian aid to Jackson, Mississippi, and the Mississippi Delta, where the capital of this capitalism was created? When cotton was king, and the slaves were those who created the cotton. When did they get justice and humanitarian aid? Where's the rush to support the people of Louisiana after Katrina, and still to this day they have problems, economic problems in Louisiana, and there's no rush for billions? Where's the rush for the $1 trillion make it better this time? There is no rush for there. So we must say no to the billions for war.
No to the billions for war.
We must say no to American forcing Russia to defend itself against ballistic missiles on its border.
Right, say it.
To call for peace without a just solution to the problem is a very empty and hollow call for peace. We must say no to the military-industrial complex. Because if we say yes, we have to say no to housing. We must say no to war. Because if we say yes, if we say no to war, it's the yes for the right to vote. We must say no to this war. And any politician who claims to represent our communities with our forgotten issues, we must say no to them when it comes time for the vote. We must remove them. When we speak of civilian casualties, we must speak of Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Mumia Abu-Jamal, who told us the truth, and they are in prison in America today. We must say no to a war that keeps our political prisoners, and we have many in America, although there are those who say they are not. Those of us who live here in the tyranny of America know better. And remember the gentleman from Ukraine who said, remember what you're talking about. You're talking about blue-eyed blondes who are being slaughtered. And my question to everyone is, what is the difference? Tell me the difference about the slaughter. Tell me what you think about that difference. And then I'll tell you where I stand in your struggle. Because if your struggle is not my struggle, you become the enemy. Remember that.
Good, Ralph, good.
Brothers and sisters, As I said before, our movement begins now. And I see we have a speaker who's better than I am talking about it. Sister Betty, who's been working on education, the dollars for education for 50 years, and there is no rush to educate our children. And so, in closing, I say again, there has been a lie told about what America is and what our fight must be. We have said for 60 years, an injury to one is an injury to all.
Thank you.
And if you don't understand that, and I don't care what banner or flag you have, if you don't understand an injury to one is an injury to all, you're going nowhere. We're talking about justice and freedom for all. And I hate to include the Ukrainians after the display that we have seen in the corporate media and to the people here. And I want somebody from the Ukrainian crowd to say no to the representative who said, remember, this time we're talking about blue-eyed blondes being slaughtered. I want you to ask the question, and what about everyone else being slaughtered? Is there a difference, and do you see a difference? And until you answer that question, say no more.
Thank you, Ralph.
Because it falls on hollow ears.
Yeah.
And so,
Thank you, Ralph Pointer.
freedom with a just solution.
Yes.
Because if you cry peace without having a just solution, it's an empty cry. It's an empty holler for peace.
Thank you,
well,
Brother
thank
Ralph.
you all. Thank you all for
Brother
listening.
Ralph Pointer.
Thanks again.
Brother Ralph Pointer. Listen, good people. Listen, good people. Betty, Sister Betty. Listen, good people. Take courage. Be calm. War cries are always louder than a plea for truth and justice and peace. Yes.
Yeah, now our next speaker is Marty Goodman, Social Action and Stand with Julian Assange in New York. He's a former member of the Transit Workers Union, Local 100, Executive Board, and confirmed street activist. And just give you a little history, the Transit Workers Union, Local 100, was founded by Mike Quill, an IRA volunteer from County Kerry in Ireland, and came over and founded the union that Marty Goodman was with. And we thank Marty Goodman for coming today.
Yeah, can you hold the mic?
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, I know.
Okay. Thank you for that reference to our great union, transit workers. Thank you, brother. Never in my life have I seen a corporate media blitzkrieg like this. It's monolithic, horrifying. The Democratic Party is truly the war party. Yes. I ask, who within the Democratic Party has stood up to Biden on the Ukraine? No one. Biden reappointed neoconservative Victoria Nuland to the 4th position in the State Department. She was key to the CIA coup in the Ukraine in 2014, which allowed the floodgate of fascists and Nazis into the army and the government. And by the way, Blinken, the one who we see on TV all the time, he advised Biden to join with Bush to attack Iraq back in about 2002, if people don't know that. Biden always backed NATO, backed war in Iraq, and if this time makes it look like I support NATO's existence, I say down with NATO, and NATO, not a penny to NATO. Yes. Who old enough can forget that the U.S. NATO bombed Serbia to smithereens In 1999, they're saying this is the biggest war. Sarah spoke about Yugoslavia, and it was a crime against humanity what was done by the U.S. to Yugoslavia. Back in 1990, the U.S. lied to Gorbachev when it promised NATO would not advance 1 inch to the east. After the USSR fell, NATO doubles its size to the Russian border. In 2019, U.S. buddy President Zelensky declared that NATO membership, quote, remains an unwavering goal. Zelensky applied to the EU a few days ago, NATO's backbone. The U.S. puppet was used to pursue wars in Serbia, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria. US-UN backed the recognition of Israel's illegal declaration of sovereignty over Palestinian East Jerusalem and the Syrian Golan Heights. Also, the U.S. via the Saudis still bomb Yemen. The U.S. bombed Niger, tribal areas of Pakistan, Somalia, and turned Libya into a failed state. Okay, what about Russia? Our view, Socialist Action, says Russia is an imperialist capitalist state run by oligarchs. But Russia well remembers its 20 million dead in World War II. NATO missiles in the Ukraine could hit Russia in just 5 minutes. The U.S. has maintained its first strike nuclear option, if anyone has forgotten that. My organization, Socialist Action, is a revolutionary organization. We refuse to take the side of imperialism under anyone's blood-soaked flag. Today, Ukraine is so hand in glove and jacked up by imperialism that we take neither side in this one. We want war to end. No to war. Shut it down.
Shut it down.
Shut it down.
Victory to the Donbass Republic.
The ultimate cause of this war is U.S. imperialism and capitalism.
Yeah.
Remove the U.S.-NATO axis, and this war is over.
Yeah.
The U.S. has up to 1,100 military bases around the world. We say, shut them all down. Not a penny for war. Not a penny for the Pentagon. We must build a powerful, united, democratic movement of millions. Stay in the streets. US-UN out now. No war on Russia. And I must add, we're talking about double standards. Look at how they're letting the Ukrainian refugees come into Poland when they blockaded Syrian refugees, if you remember that. Biden has deported 20,000 Haitians back to a hellhole run by a US-backed dictator. Biden, stop your racist deportations.
I'm Ukrainian.
Lastly, Biden, end the frame-up and torture of Julian Assange, who exposed the lies and brutality of imperialism to the entire planet. Free Julian Assange, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Leonard Peltier, and all political prisoners. Stop the war. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker, we love this form of free speech.
No, calm down.
Our next speaker is Larry Holt from the Workers' World, veteran, war-resist activist, and community organizer.
It's not the first time some white dude tried to stop me from speaking. You know, we gotta go back to the anti-war community and talk to these folks and tell them to get out here on the street with us. Because I feel that there's some amnesia going on. People are forgetting what we've been marching against for a long, long time. The war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, other wars planned by generals in the Pentagon. People are forgetting that. I'm a veteran of the Vietnam War era, drafted, a military resistor, like some of my other sisters and brothers out here, and we learn. We learn what U.S. invaded countries for. It wasn't to liberate them. It was to dominate them. It wasn't to free. It was to conquer. It was to control. 2 world wars were fought to divide up Europe and the rest of the world. And let me tell you something. This dangerous war that's brewing in Eastern Europe, it's about the same thing. And NATO and U.S. imperialism is trying to finish what has started about 30 years ago. And that's taking over what's left. Taking it all over. And workers have to stand up. Workers everywhere have to stand up. And they have to say, we will not allow a nuclear war.
We will not allow a nuclear war.
So that corporations can have more territory. That's the #1 thing. So when we come out next time, let's come out stronger.
Yes, sir.
I think there's somebody that wants to smash the anti-war movement. They don't want us to fight. But we're going to stand up and fight back and build a real anti-war movement or rebuild it. No NATO war against the world.
Our next guest is Jack Baldwin from the New York Green State Party, playwright, screenwriter, editor, anti-war and environmental activist, with Bill Court and Grandpa Al Lewis, who were part of the Green Party. Go ahead, Jack.
Thank you. Are we getting into something? Thank you. I feel privileged to be allowed to speak today. So now we find ourselves once again up to our necks in another stupid, unnecessary war. Putin is being demonized everywhere with justification. But the real demon is imperialism, of which both Russia and the U.S. are guilty. And now it's very possible that American troops and American planes will be sent into the region, starting a world war. I was there in February 2003, before the Iraq War, when 10 million people around the world protested, yet the U.S. invaded anyway. How did Bush and his supporters know that they could get away with this, invading despite 10 million protesters? It was because they assumed correctly that all those protesters wouldn't follow through and disrupt the status quo. Most importantly, people remained within the two-party system, hoping naively to change it from within. Yes, the Green Party is the peace party, but it's more than that. Unlike Biden and Putin with their power games, Greens don't think of the earth as a chessboard.
Yes.
We think of it as a powerful yet delicate ecological system upon which all life, including human life, depends. I imagine many of you listening to this are Democrats. You must send a message now to the Democratic leadership, to Biden, to Pelosi, to Schumer. You must tell them that they risk a world war
By sending in American troops, you will leave the two-party system and join the party of peace, the Greens. And if you want to join the Greens right now, that's okay too. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Dylan Ewald Conley from the Democratic Socialists of America and a member of the Anti-War Working Group.
Don't read from your phone, Dylan. Just speak from the heart. Don't read. It ain't gonna work. Just speak.
I'm here to speak on behalf of the Anti-War Working Group of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America. We fully condemn Russia's illegal and unjust invasion of Ukraine. Russia has already violated the United Nations Charter and the most basic laws of war. We call on the Russian military to immediately end their invasion and fully withdraw from Ukraine. This is the only safe path to peace. Without it, we fear that Russia's war of aggression can only escalate past its already disastrous state. Scenes from Ukraine invoke for me memories of the U.S. invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. We know how swiftly our government declared victory there and how swiftly that victory became a prolonged occupation, which immiserated the region. We pray that the people of Ukraine will be spared the same fate. We also fear the possibility that further escalations in Ukraine could come not only from Russia, but from our own government. Unlike the people of Russia and Ukraine, our leaders and those of us descended from the American settlers have never experienced a war of aggression. And we have suffered least under the boot of militarism, and yet now command and give their voice to the biggest boot in the history of the world. It is my fear that in so doing we have come to understand justice only through the application of that boot. We hear of justice now in the economic sanctions levied against Russia's central bank, and we know the effects of this kind of economic warfare. We have seen it already in Iran, in Cuba, in Venezuela, to name just a few. We understand that the most vulnerable people, the working class, women, children, and ethnic minorities are the ones hurt most by these economic sanctions. The Russian people did not call for this war. Many thousands are right now applying all their effort to pull us back from the brink of a global conflict and an unimaginable catastrophe.
Russia is right.
We must remember these people and this catastrophe when we hear calls for U.S. and NATO intervention. Direct military confrontation between two nuclear powers has always been and must remain off the table. That includes any calls for a no-fly zone. However well-intentioned they may be, a no-fly zone would mean NATO planes shooting down Russian aircraft over Ukraine. It is a declaration of war concealed in the language of peace and a terrible abuse of language. But while NATO says it will not charge ahead into this nightmarish scenario, they continue to rally their troops as if preparing for an even wider war that would have no winners. Why is it that even as the first dominoes begin to fall, our leaders are still setting more along the path to annihilation? For decades, we have seen this crisis brewing, and for decades, we have known the steps that the U.S. and the Western powers could take to end and de-escalate and avoid where we are now. But now we must admit that it is not obvious when we'll end the fighting in Ukraine. Yet this should only strengthen our commitment to earnest diplomacy with all parties. It is reprehensible that Joe Biden said he has no plans to meet with Putin. That now is not the moment for it. Now is exactly the moment. This is hardly the first conflict where the people with the power to end it have been condemnable and guilty of war crimes. There is no honor in boycotting peace talks. It is the behavior of one who knows only how to apply the boot and who has forgotten how to remove it. Solidarity with the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia. Our only enemy is capitalism and all of the oligarchs and armies that it has created. No war but class war. No war.
It was the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and we are organizing today to oppose the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine is a country that deserves its integrity and it deserves protection from aggression. We have to be very, very clear that what the United States has done in expanding NATO since 1990 is a terrible mistake and a terrible provocation. But I think that we have to agree with what Chris Hedges said earlier today, that war is not the answer to that. And what we heard from Vladimir Putin before he invaded, when he asserted to the people of the world that Ukraine does not exist, Ukraine is not a country. I think we have to call that out. We have to say, no, that is not correct. We have to say that the Ukrainian people have a right to self-determination, that the Ukrainian people have a right
part of Russia since Catherine the Great.
The Ukrainian people have a right to their territorial integrity and their sovereignty.
Not true.
The Russians need to withdraw from Ukraine.
No.
But what is the role of diplomacy in all of this? We all talk about diplomacy and negotiation. What does the U.S. bring to the table in that? What we are saying as we develop an anti-war voice again in the labor movement in the United States is that our position is that the U.S. should declare right now that Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. That we will not continue the extension of NATO on Russia's border. That we will take away the aggressive power of NATO from Russia's border. That we have to say that it is our position that Ukraine will never be part of NATO, and that it is our policy not to extend NATO any further. And that we will negotiate a real reorganization of the integrity of this national collective security arrangements and architecture in Europe, so that NATO doesn't have to exist in a new architecture of true international solidarity and security for NATO. And we will stand in solidarity as we did with the Iraqi workers, with the workers of Ukraine, or with the workers of Russia, to say that the Russians should leave and that Russian aggression should end, and that we should be united in those efforts diplomatically to declare that our country will stop the expansion of NATO and enter into negotiations for a rearrangement of security arrangements in Europe. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Our next speaker is going to be Daniel Burke. There's only a couple more, and we'll call it a day. From the Schiller Institute. He's a former candidate for the U.S. Senate in New Jersey, and he was an independent candidate, I believe.
Hi, my name is Daniel Burke. I'm with the Schiller Institute and the International LaRouche Movement. I want to say it's absolutely the case. We need a new international security and development architecture. It is the statement of the Schiller Institute that the cause of this crisis is the breakdown of the neoliberal economic system. We are facing a tidal wave of at least 1 quadrillion, if not much more, in worthless speculative assets that are based in the City of London and Wall Street. And that is the bubble that people are trying to save by crushing Russia and China. That's what you're getting from the City of London and Wall Street, is a policy of eliminating the only nation states who can stand up to enforced deindustrialization, destruction of capability of actually surviving, as you see with the destruction of a necessary means of life, with CO2 reduction. This is climate colonialism. This is well known. Look at the statements of India. Look at the statements from African nations like the president of Nigeria. And in October, at the COP26 conference, many developing nations rejected the destruction of their own economies, Russia and China among them. It is up to us to lay the basis for the development of every nation on this planet. The World Land Bridge. We have to get the idea across to people that we can eliminate the worthless debts of Wall Street with Glass-Steagall in every country. We can bring about credit for development like China has been doing with the Belt and Road Initiative. The solution is peace through development. Peace through development. Peace through development. It's the only way that we can possibly rescue humanity. Ukraine should be a bridge between Russia and Europe. It should be a bridge of the Belt and Road Initiative. That's what the future is for a neutral, demilitarized Ukraine. So please join me. Go to the Schiller Institute website, schillerinstitute.com. Take this leaflet if you have it and sign it and add your name to this policy. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
One of the biggest supporters of WBAI, Mitchell Cohen, is probably responsible for helping save WBAI.
We stand today with the people of Ukraine against Russian aggression. We stand also against NATO and NATO's aggression. We stand with the people all over the world who are fighting against U.S. imperialism and capitalism. Russia is a capitalist country. U.S. is a capitalist country. They're fighting over the pipelines and who's going to control the energy flow into Europe. And that's what started this whole thing the way it is now. People of Ukraine have a right to resist. And I want to make that clear because a lot of people lose that. I also want to make clear that in 1998, the U.S. Senate approved NATO's expansion by a vote of 80 to 19. Quote, this in fact is the beginning of another 50 years of peace, said Senator Joe Biden, ranking Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee and a key player in opposing and supporting NATO's expansion east, regardless of what he says now. So we have to understand the games that are being played, the propaganda games. My point is that there's a ton of propaganda, there's a ton of lies that are being spewed at us, but even if we expose them all, that doesn't justify the invasion of a country by another capitalist country. And it's not allowed, and it's wrong, it is immoral, and we have to stand and oppose it, and stand with the people in Russia and with the people in Ukraine, who the movement, the peace movement, and the people here who are saying no to war, no to nuclear war, and no to imperialism.
Our final speaker today, and you can feel the spirit of David Klein with Veterans for Peace today. And no one better to speak on that is Mike Ferner, who's the former president and the executive director of Veterans for Peace. And he was a Navy corpsman during the Vietnam War, and he's a peace and justice and environmental activist. And we have the honor of having the former president of Veterans for Peace, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you. I also want to let you know that I came here from Toledo, Ohio to be with you, and it was worth all 12 hours on Amtrak, I'll tell you. But thank you very much for the organizers for the invitation to be here. I was a hospital corpsman during the Vietnam War, and I worked at a Navy hospital trying to put back the pieces of young men's minds and bodies who came back from Vietnam. And by the way, that's a job that every member of Congress by law should have to do before they vote on a Pentagon funding bill. Exactly. But mostly I want to tell you about a little story from Baghdad. I was there before the U.S. invaded in 2003. I was there with a peace group called Voices in the Wilderness. Some of you may know Kathy Kelly. I was invited to go over there with what turned out to be the last delegation before the U.S. invasion. And there were about 80 of us there from all around the world, an international delegation of citizens who wanted to do whatever it was they could do to try to stop that invasion. And there were people who had just come in a caravan they started in England and went all the way through Europe and arrived in Baghdad. There was a group of us that were going to be out in the street in Baghdad demonstrating on February 15th, 2003. Many of you were also out in the streets on February 15th, 2003, because tens of millions of people around the world were out in the streets telling the U.S. and Britain not to invade Iraq. I was there with a sociologist from Brazil who was a peace activist, and he traveled to Baghdad. And we were supposed to put together a statement about why we were going to be out in the street with all these other people around the world. And we saw all of the demonstrators around the world demanding peace. And this friend of mine from Brazil said, you know, we don't have a war problem, we have a democracy problem. Right. Because millions of people around the world are saying no war and their governments are ignoring them. So we have a democracy problem. And as much as I'm a peace activist and a member of Veterans for Peace, I know that we all are concerned about health care and the environment and justice and a whole lot of other issues. And when you look at what's at the bottom of all of those, it's the rule of corporations that are able to spend money like it's free speech. Yes. They're able to lobby and lie over the airwaves, able to buy legislators, to write legislation, to make the weapons that we then buy. And if we can take those protections away from corporations, no more free speech, no more 14th Amendment. Those things were made for human beings, not legal fictions. Right. And when we can take those protections away and have democracy start to rule what happens in this country, we're going to go a long way to taking that capitalist monkey off the back of people all over the world. Thank you.
All right, what we're going to do is have a paging grannies. We'll finish it out. And our next speaker only needs one name. He's like Cher or Madonna. He goes by the name of Zool, and he actually organized this madness today here in Times Square. And he's going to finish up with a poem, and then the Raging Grannies are going to take us out with some Broadway tunes on Broadway.
This is a poem called Zen Poem by my favorite rabbi, Father Daniel Berrigan. How I long for supernatural powers, said the novice mournfully to the Holy One. I see a dead child and I want to say, arise. I see a sick man and I long to say, be healed. I see a bent old woman and I long to say, walk straight. Alas, I feel like a dead stick in paradise. Master, can you confer upon me supernatural powers? The old man shook his head fretfully. How long have I been with you and you know nothing? How long long have you been with me and learned nothing? Listen, I have walked the earth 80 years. I have never raised a dead child. I have never healed a sick man. I have never straightened an old woman's spine. Children die, men grow sick, the aged fall under a stigma of frost. And what is that to you or me but the turn of the wheel, but the way of the world, but the gateway to paradise? Supernatural powers. Then you would play God, would spin the thread of life and measure the thread 5 years, 50 years, 80 years, and cut the thread? Supernatural powers. I have wandered the earth for 80 years. I confess to you, sprout without root, root without flower. I know nothing of supernatural powers. I'm still trying to perfect my natural powers. To see and not be seduced, to hear and not be deafened, to taste and not be eaten, to touch and not be bought. But you, would you walk on water? Would you master the air? Would you swallow fire? Go talk with the dolphins. They will teach you glibly how to grow gills. Go listen to eagles. They will hatch you, nest you, eaglets and airmen. Go join the circus. Those tricksters will teach you in deception for dimes. Birdman, bagman, poor fish spouting water, moon crawling at sea forever, supernatural powers. Do you seek miracles? Listen, go draw water, hew wood, break stones. How miraculous. Listen, blessed is the one who walks the earth 5 years, 50 years, 80 years, and deceives no one, and curses no one, and kills no one. On such a one, the angels whisper in wonder, behold the irresistible power of natural powers, of height, of joy, of soul, of non-belittling. You dry stick in the crude soil of this world, spring, root, leaf, flower, trace around and around and around, an inch, a mile, the world's green extent, a liberated zone of paradise. The Raging Grannies.
Now, forget about all the other musicals here. We got the real musical here on Broadway with the Raging Grannies. Oh, yeah, I gotta pass on the mic. Thanks everyone for coming, and see you at our next anti-war demonstration, which will probably be Taiwan next week. Want to go on? Okay.
I'm very generous of
Stop!
Okay, we're going to sing a song called No Nuclear Proliferation, which was written by Corrine Willinger, who's now 93 years old. One of our great raging granny songwriters. Nuclear proliferation, we must stop its global spread, or the peoples of the whole world have to live in fear and dread. We must all tell all the nations we cannot have nuclear war. Peace and justice, common safety, that is what we're marching for. We must destroy atomic weapons. We must make them disappear. We cannot have our lives shattered, and those bombs are everywhere. Nuclear proliferation, we must stop its global spread, or the peoples of the whole world have to live in fear and dread. One more song.
Yeah.
Anchors Away is the tune, but we have a few different words to it. War's not the way, my boys. War's not the way. The jobs, the travel, and the pay are yours to put you in harm's way, so they can use you in their game. Give you a gun and send you overseas to make a kiss on the other side. War's not the way, my girls. War's not the way. Kill or be killed, you're told. And when you get back home, you'll pay with nightmares of bodies lost. What is it for? Then they'll cut your benefits to find another useless bloody war. War's not the way, my friends. War's not the way. We who support our troops are hoping they come home today, so we can begin to work for schools and jobs and more. Work for change begins at home, so first we have to stop these bloody wars. So first we have to stop these bloody wars. Thank you for the Raging Granny.
Be slow. Doors over if you want it.
You know where we are.
Everyone is asking, what do we do? What can I do? It's very simple. Tell our leaders to talk, to have good faith negotiations.
Yeah.
Not negotiations that mean the U.S. gets what it wants.
That's right.
That is why we are at this point today. So, power to the people.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Let's all work for peace. Thank you so much.